So let's get back to the higher education.
Sure.
Now, there's a lot of trendy words. You talk about, learning management systems, LMS, distance learning. Well, first off, let's go to learning management systems.
Sure.
Elaborate on that, please.
Learning management systems are used for a variety of purposes, and many people equate them to distance learning. They are two distinct beasts, but for the sake of argument today, we'll just keep them wired together. LMS is the system that sits in the background that you as a student are interacting with for your coursework, for your tests, for your interaction with your fellow students, with your interaction with your professor. And LMS, as we know them today, have been around for a good 10 years. And what we're beginning to witness is they are undergoing a spectacular change, especially in the context of social networking, so that, let me pose this scenario, because I just saw a demonstration of this a couple of months ago. A learning management system that looks a lot like Facebook, in which 4 or 5 students are interacting collaboratively with 1 or 2 or 3 professors. And it's highly interactive, highly conversational, highly collaborative. Now, that's different than what we've learned that LMSs have been in the past. They've been very regimented. So I think the jury is out in what distance learning or LMSs look like in the next couple of years, but I would bet my money that they are going to be decidedly different looking than what you see today.
Obviously, one of the benefits to collaborative learning is that, almost one-on-one.
Right.
I mean, you said it is about 1 to 3 teacher-to-student ratio there. Obviously, the individual attention is one benefit to that. Are there any other benefits to collaborative learning?
Well, it's the mentor aspect of it. And the other project that I worked on about a year ago, which I thought was remarkably interesting, was a university in New York City that was using social networking componentry towards the end of the class to plug in graduates and mentors in the field itself to work cooperatively with the students towards the end of their coursework so that they now can engage them and get them plugged into the industry in which they wanted to serve. So you wire in outside influences, internal influences, and suddenly it is a very highly communicative, collaborative environment in which industry gets what they want, education gets what they want, and the student gets what they want. It's amazing.
Huh. So what is it about distance learning that some people kind of turn their nose up at?
I think what we've also learned, and this is why Facebook-like environments are better, distance learning is very sterile. You have very little eye-to-eye communication. It's also very top-down. It's instructor-forced, if I can use such a term. In a Facebook-like environment, it's more collaborative. There's a lot free-form. There's a lot of research. There's a lot of controversy and provocative statements on the fly. And so it is, in many ways, almost an agreement-setting environment. Now, it has to have some educational components to it, certainly, but it's more the debate scenario than it is a classroom in a can, which many LMSs tend to look like.
But there are benefits to distance learning, though. I mean, we have folks that sometimes they just can't get to.
All right, so let's create this scenario. We are right on the verge of a fully networked globe, right on the edge of it. And do you use Skype or any of those type of technologies?
Bit of a caveman.
Interactive video technologies are here. People use Skype every day of the week. They talk to each other around the planet, looking each other in the eye. And so LMSs today really don't take advantage of that eyeball-to-eyeball communications. What happens in an environment in which you are looking your fellow students eyeball to eyeball, but they're all over the planet? Here, there's one in Singapore, there's one in Moscow, there's one in Brazil. And then how does that interactive translate into the educational process? So what we're going to have to learn is, what does coursework look like? That's really the fundamental question at the bottom of that. In a fully interactive, globally distributed learning environment. And that's not rocket science. I could put together that class today, but the question is, what is the characteristics of that class?
But I think that's exactly it. That leads to another big issue when we're talking about higher education is the globalization aspect of it. I mean, when we're talking about a world where we can take something we talked about off air before the show. You can take a Russian class in Moscow online, and you can take just about anything around the world.
Right.
But then that causes all kinds of problems, like accreditation and degree matriculation. I just wanted to say that word because it makes me sound smart, and I just learned it. He taught me that one. Don't take it away. But no, it's a very good. There's a lot of problems with that.
The questions are being raised. And so if you really want to get involved in some of these conversations, one of my favorite forums is EDUCAUSE, educause.edu. Educause.edu is the organization to be involved with if you're interested in anything and everything to do with technology and education, specifically higher education. Now, we've been having a conversation about higher ed. We haven't even talked about K through 12. And K through 12, as we both know, is long overdue for a complete overhaul and revolution in the way that we train and teach and educate young people, but that's not my expertise. I talk specifically about higher ed. But we can't ignore that component of the industry either, because that feeds right into higher ed. Now, here's an interesting, and I'm going to be very provocative on this particular show. There is actually a organization out there, and I can send you the link on it. They're proposing that the large majority of coursework taught in the community college systems could be distributed via advanced LMSs, and if that's true, why don't we provide that to every child in the United States of America at no charge? That question is being raised. If you can web enable it, if you can put it in the can, why not make it free? If you really want to compete in a global environment, we'd better start doing a better job of educating our students. Now, that statement alone, I just shook a couple foundations around the United States, as a matter of fact. But it's an interesting question.
Yeah.
And those are the kind of questions that are being raised right now.
And those are the kind of questions that need to be raised.
I agree.
I mean, we have even our president talking about we need to reform some of the education. But the questions being raised is exactly what we need to do, so we can have this debate. So there are pros and cons. What is the argument on this?
Well, what happens is that anytime you have a paradigm shift opportunity, you're going to lose some industries, you're going to gain some industries, and you're going to end up with industries that never existed before. Same thing's going to happen with education. Education's going to be shook to its foundations, especially if you get engaged in the other conversation, and that is universal, globally accepted accreditation, which is a whole can of worms that we could get into it with wax on for hours.
We will.
And then there are the other issues such as degree assignment and credit hour assignment. So back to your scenario. If I take that class in Moscow in Russian, and then I take another class in Singapore, and then I take a class in particle physics out of CERN in Sweden, where do all those hours accumulate? How do we recognize those hours? And then who assigns that degree at the end of the day? Those conversations are just now emerging, and many of them are emerging outside of the educational community itself, which should disturb them, because these should be conversations that are driven by the educational community. Because what's at risk here is someone on the outside is going to reinvent all the way around them and complete a complete paradigm shift, and no one's going to like the result of that, I don't think. But we live in fascinating times, there's no doubt about that.
I think that's a perfect time for a little cliffhanger. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back and we're going to talk more about globalization in higher education and IT higher education. You're watching For a Living. Don't go away.